I found her alone, weak and barely breathing on the sand, a small, delicate shape against the vast expanse of beach. The morning fog was just lifting, and the first amber rays of sunlight revealed what looked like a strange, motionless rock. But something made me stop my usual dawn walk. Something made me look closer. A baby sea turtle, no bigger than my palm, stranded far from the water's edge. Her shell was covered in a thin layer of sand, eyes nearly sealed shut with dried salt. Each shallow breath appeared to be a struggle. I knelt beside her, my heart constricting at the sight of her vulnerable form. Had she hatched late, missing the safety of her siblings' migration? Or perhaps been washed back ashore after a night of battling currents too strong for her tiny flippers? "Hey there, little one," I whispered, my voice catching. The world around us seemed to slow, the rhythmic crash of waves fading to background noise as I assessed her condition. Her flippers moved weakly, a small gesture that sparked both hope and urgency within me. I had walked this stretch of coastline nearly every morning for the past 3 years, ever since moving to this quiet beach town to escape the suffocating pace of city life. Never had I encountered anything like this. The beach had always been a place of solace, of predictable tides and familiar shells. Now it had become a crossroads of life and death. The sand was cool beneath my knees as I leaned closer, examining the turtle without touching her. She was a loggerhead, I guessed, though my knowledge of sea turtles was limited to what I'd learned from nature documentaries and the occasional educational display at the local aquarium. Her shell bore the distinctive reddish-brown color, though it was dulled by dehydration and exposure. I knew touching her could do more harm than good, but leaving her meant certain death. The sun was rising quickly, and with it, the heat that would soon bake the exposed sand. Predators would emerge. Time was precious. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, searching for the nearest wildlife rescue center. The connection was spotty, typical for this remote stretch of coastline. When the call finally connected, the conservation officer's voice was clear and direct. "Keep her moist, but don't put her in water. Use wet sand. Bring her in immediately." "What if she doesn't make it?" I asked, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of responsibility I suddenly felt. "Just get her here as quickly as you can," was the gentle but firm response. "Every minute counts." As I hung up, a seagull landed nearby, its beady eyes assessing the situation with predatory interest. I waved it away frantically, my protective instincts surging with unexpected force. The bird took flight reluctantly, circling overhead as if to say it would wait. Scooping up handfuls of damp sand, I created a makeshift nest around her, careful not to flip her over. Each time my fingers came near, her flippers would twitch with what little strength remained. I couldn't tell if it was fear or fight in those movements, but there was life there. A fierce, fragile determination. "I'm going to help you," I promised, my voice barely audible above the ocean's whisper. "Just hold on." I removed my cotton shirt, dampened it with seawater, and gently, wrapped it around her. The morning breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed as I lifted this precious bundle. She weighed almost nothing, yet felt like the heaviest responsibility I'd ever held. The walk back to my car felt endless. Every step was measured, every bump in the sand a potential jolt to her weakened body. I spoke to her continuously, nonsensical words of comfort that were as much for me as for her. The connection was immediate and profound. This tiny creature's life now intertwined with mine through chance or fate. "You're a fighter," I murmured, carefully negotiating a section of driftwood and debris. "I can tell. You wouldn't have made it this far if you weren't." My car was parked a quarter mile away, and the journey seemed to stretch into eternity. The sun climbed higher, warming my back as sweat began to bead on my forehead. I kept the bundle cradled close, shielding it from the increasing heat. An older couple walking their dog gave me curious looks as I passed, my shirt missing, my expression likely wild with concern. I didn't stop to explain. Every second counted. When I finally reached my car, I faced a new dilemma: how to drive while keeping her stable. I fashioned a nest in the passenger seat footwell, using a beach towel I kept in the trunk. The air conditioning blasted cold air, and I worried it might be too much for her delicate system. I adjusted the vents, directing them away from her makeshift carrier. I watched through glass as they placed her in a shallow container, administered fluids, cleaned her shell. Hours passed. couldn't leave. Something about those determined flippers, those barely open eyes, had anchored itself deep within me. They named her Grace, appropriate for her delicate movements and the grace of timing that had saved her life. For 3 weeks, I visited daily, watching her strengthen. She graduated from critical care to a larger rehabilitation tank. Her movements became more purposeful, less fragile. The staff taught me about her species, about the countless dangers she had faced and would face still. The day of her release came with mixed emotions. We returned to the same beach where I'd found her, but further down the coastline where her journey to the sea would be shorter. The container was placed on the sand, and when the lid was removed, Grace paused, as if gathering courage for the journey ahead. Then, with determination that belied her size, she began her march toward the waves. Each deliberate push of her flippers left tiny tracks in the wet sand, a temporary record of courage that the tide would soon erase. I walked alongside, a guardian no longer needed but unwilling to end our connection until I absolutely had to. The first wave touched her shell, and her movements quickened with recognition. The second wave lifted her slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her flippers moving with newfound purpose. By the third wave, she was swimming, truly swimming, no longer fighting against nature, but working in harmony with it. I stood in ankle-deep water long after she disappeared from sight, watching the horizon with tear-blurred vision. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the small drama that had played out along its edge. But I was forever changed. Some might say I saved Grace that morning on the beach. But standing there, feeling the pull of the tide around my feet and the expanse of possibility before me, I knew the truth was far more complex. In her fragility and resilience, this tiny creature had reminded me of something essential: that sometimes our most profound connections come from reaching out to help another being, asking nothing in return but the privilege of bearing witness to their journey. Grace had returned to the vastness of her ocean home, carrying with her a piece of my heart, and I returned to my life carrying her story, a testament to how salvation often works both ways.